Good morning and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Salia Strzemska. The European Union is gearing up to tighten the screws on Russian banks and energy firms, but several Kremlin-friendly nations within the bloc are opposing the move. Slovakia's populist Prime Minister Robert Fico and Hungary's Viktor Orbán are prepared to flex their veto power. Will the EU overcome these hurdles, and what will another package of sanctions this year mean for Russia? To discuss this, I have Sławomir Raszewski, Senior Lecturer, University of London, joining me here right now. Good morning, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So let's zoom in on this latest package of sanctions. What does it entail?
So the next pack of sanctions is essentially going to target the most important parts of the energy economy of Russia. So oil, 1/3 of revenues to the budget of the Russian Federation are the revenues from the oil trade. And oil is very important. In the past, the European Union introduced a so-called price cap that would essentially make it legal to trade oil with Russia at a certain cap. This time, the EU wants to reduce this cap even lower to $45 per barrel. So that's one thing. The other thing is in the domain of natural gas. With natural gas, the situation is a bit more complicated. The EU decided to ban transactions concerning now defunct Nord Stream 1 and pipelines.
Right. So let's take a closer look at this oil price cap. How will the EU coordinate with the rest of the G7, for instance, in order to make this effective?
Absolutely. So the EU itself has to coordinate with its partners within the G7 to make this cap effective, and there will be discussions about that. Of course, a lot will depend on how these nations are going to respond to that. And of course, in the grand scheme of things, it will depend on the current situation on oil market, because the situation is also changing rapidly, largely because of instability in the Middle East.
Right, of course. Now, I mean, let's perhaps take a look at a potential U.S. response. Of course, we have von der Leyen traveling to, we'll have her traveling to Canada with a lot on her agenda. But what kind of response are we expecting from the U.S. given President Trump's stance, right?
Okay, there's been a very interesting relationship between the EU and the US, and I think it's been evolving, so to speak, because as we remember initially, there's been a bit of friction between the two economies, and now it seems that she's slightly changing. So we might be actually witnessing actually surprises there. At the same time, we also need to remember that it is very much the case of international markets. So what is happening on international markets? US is the largest producer of oil on the planet, followed by Saudi Arabia and Russia. So these are three largest producers of oil in the world. And any sanctions on oil are likely to have impact on supplies from other regions. So I think that a lot will depend on the situation on the international markets, and a lot will depend on where we stand with the current developments in the Middle East. Since if you look at the prices on international markets, since yesterday we have a rise of by 3% of oil on average, and this is largely because of this uncertainty over what is going to happen, whether the conflict is going to escalate, whether we see some developments on that front. And if that happens, then of course this will send prices even further. And of course that will that may undermine the efforts to further increase or decrease the price cap of oil.
Mm-hmm, of course, and just going back to the U.S., because it seems that there's little support for what the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham proposed, right? This 500% tariff. Do you think that this will change? I'm just trying to perhaps gauge the sentiment in the U.S. and some of the potential responses, because it seems that nothing much is happening on that front.
Well, as I said, two countries, the US and the EU, are quite different when it comes to oil and oil supplies. The EU is dependent on imports of oil. US is the largest producer of oil. They are self-sufficient. It's the consistent policy of the past administrations to be energy independent. So, it doesn't really affect the US that much. Obviously, it does affect on many other fronts. But when it comes to the supply, I think the EU is in a very vulnerable position at the moment. What is interesting is that since we talked about oil, there's also the aspect of natural gas here, which by the way, involves LNG imports. And what is interesting is that we've been following these developments. It seems that LNG imports haven't been really addressed. And in fact, most of the imports from Russia, which have been growing over the past few years, are the imports of liquefied natural gas.
Right. So, the EU is planning to phase out all gas from Russia by 2027. And of course, we don't know the details, but we already know that Slovakia and Hungary are opposing. So do you think that indeed they will use their veto power, or will, the rest of the EU manage to convince them to do otherwise? And what would need to be promised to Slovakia and Hungary for that to happen?
If you look at the ongoing discussions between the countries you mentioned and the EU, the situation is very difficult because we have two countries which are dependent on supplies of gas from Russia. And these countries do not really want to sacrifice the supplies on the basis of support for the ongoing war in Ukraine. So I think that there will be some very tough decisions here. And we've heard in the media, we've heard in statements that the language has been very harsh when it comes to Hungary and Slovakia, including calls for very decisive actions. So I think that there will be, if you like, both these two countries and the EU are on the collision trajectory. And I think that there will be very difficult conversations there. And I think that this is potentially very disruptive for the EU as such. And I think that we're probably reaching an existential sort of moment for the European Union to know which way to go and what to do with countries which not necessarily align with EU mainstream policy agenda. So very difficult when it comes to these two countries. These countries, also the leaders of these two countries, said that they cannot compromise their national security, they cannot compromise, and of course national security, understand supply of energy, which affects or may affect, or disruption of supplies may affect national security.
Right, and so would you say that it was a mistake on the part of the EU to be so lenient towards Hungary and Slovakia from the very beginning?
It's difficult to say. I think that if you look at the number, 18th package of sanctions, one of the questions is why in the third year of the conflict, we are talking about the 18th package of sanctions. So it's been a long time, it's been a long way. So I think that's a lot that could have been done earlier. And now we are kind of reaching the point where there's too many things happening in the international relations, and there's too much happening in the global affairs. And I'm not sure whether there is absorption capacity for these type of policy initiatives, and we clearly see that when we look at Hungary and Slovakia.
Absolutely. And so you've mentioned that, of course, it has taken the EU a while, right, to introduce all of these sanctions. And regarding this latest proposed package, Ursula von der Leyen used words such as robust and hard-biting. So, what makes this package so different from all of the others?
Well, I think we knew what is going to happen, because last time we hosted me, we discussed that in details. We said that probably Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines are going to be banned, but we know that these 2 pipelines are effectively defunct, so they're not being used. And indeed, looking at the statements from Germany, for instance, the country that this pipeline is connected to or was connected to, we know that the country is not interested in future imports of gas from Russia via Nord Stream 1 and 2. These pipelines are defunct, they are destroyed, they are sabotaged, and they cannot be used. And we also have so this is one thing. And the second thing is adding 77 new sort of vessels to the sanction list. We also said that last time, that these are likely to be some military vessels which might be capable of carrying perhaps processed refined products. So essentially this is a new addition. But of course, the question is this really sending a strong message to the other party? We don't know exactly. We shall see. I mean, what we know is that these sanctions have been ongoing for 3 years, and I think that there is a degree of immunity to these sanctions already, both on largely on the part of the supplying country. So I think that the more we been waiting, the more resilience and immunity has been produced on part of Russia.
Right, and von der Leyen has also proposed to sanction the Russian direct investment fund. So what potential repercussions could this have for Moscow?
Well, I don't think that there's much hope for Russian investments in this part of the world. And I think that we clearly see that in the context of US-Russia relations. We've seen that there's probably more appetite for future development of relations, particularly in the energy sector between these two countries and the European Union. We have to remember that European Union's energy policy is largely focused on phasing out use of hydrocarbons. Of course, the question is to what extent it's going to be successful, but this is the stated objective. So the demands in the European Union for hydrocarbons is also quite flat. So this is not a very much attractive market, if you like, for investors in hydrocarbons. I mean, for renewable energy, definitely, but less so for the fossil fuels. So the question is, of course, to what extent it is going to be important factor, important element of the sanction package. I'm not sure. We shall see.
Mm-hmm. Right, and just to round up our discussion, sir, do you think that the EU will manage to pass this latest package of sanctions by the end of Polish presidency of the Council of the EU, or not? Is it too ambitious?
I mean, if you look at how ambitious these goals are, I think, you know, the first point about banning pipelines that are not functioning anyway, I mean, it's going to happen. And also when it comes to reducing the price cap from $60 to $45, I think this is also feasible. But of course, the question is to what extent it's going to be actually implemented, because we've seen this before, that it's not so much about reducing the price cap, it's more about the third countries that are involved in trade in oil, as well as liquefied natural gas between Russia and the European Union. So of course, this would need to be addressed. But of course, the question is, can the EU do that?
So as usual, we shall see. Sławomir Raszewski, Senior Lecturer, University of London, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.